When my mother-in-law, Eleanor, stood in my entryway holding a prenuptial agreement designed to strip me of every cent I might ever earn, she looked at my modest sweater and assumed she held all the power. "Sign it or the wedding is off," she scoffed, convinced I was nothing more than a broke, low-income orphan trying to leech off her son's middle-class family. Little did she know I wasn't penniless. I was holding onto a secret trust fund left behind by my late father, a four-star general, making me worth $68 million. I kept my mouth shut, signed her ridiculous paper and let her believe she'd won. But when she tried to use that very same prenup to orchestrate a hostile takeover of my life and force me out, the truth finally came to light, and Eleanor was about to find out exactly who she was messing with. My name is Clara Vance and I am 28 years old. If you looked at my life on paper today, you would see a quiet archivist working in a dimly lit city library, wearing simple oversized sweaters and driving a 10-year-old hatchback. What you wouldn't see is the $68 million sitting silently in a private trust fund bearing my name. That fortune was left to me by my late father, a decorated four-star general who spent his entire life serving with unwavering discipline. He taught me that true wealth isn't about flash, status, or demanding respect. It's about character, security, and knowing who you are when nobody is watching. When he passed away, he left me with absolute financial freedom, but he also left me with a crucial piece of wisdom. Money attracts parasites, but humility attracts genuine love. So I made a deliberate choice. I kept my inheritance entirely hidden. I rented a modest one-bedroom apartment, took a modest job surrounded by old books, and lived comfortably within a normal income. I wanted a life that was earned, not handed out, and more than anything I wanted to find a partner who loved me for who I was, not for what was in my bank account. That was when I met Mark. He was a mid-level corporate analyst, kind, hardworking, and incredibly sweet. When we began dating, he didn't care about luxury brands or high society parties. He was just happy sitting across from me in a cheap diner, sharing a plate of fries and talking about our dreams. He was everything I had hoped for, so I kept my secret locked away tight, protecting our sweet, simple connection. What I didn't realize, however, was that while Mark loved me for me, his mother was about to destroy everything we built. Mark's mother, Eleanor, was a woman who measured human worth strictly by bank accounts, country club memberships, and recognizable last names. From the moment Mark introduced us, she made her verdict crystal clear. I was an unemployed nobody who was completely beneath her family's social standing. To Eleanor, my thrifted jackets and humble job as an archivist weren't signs of modesty. They were proof that I was a desperate leech looking for a free ride. I'll never forget our second dinner at her house. The table was set with heirloom silverware that she pointedly mentioned 3 separate times. Throughout the night, Eleanor took subtle, polished digs at my background. "Clara, dear," she said, cutting her steak with practiced elegance, "it must be so overwhelming for you sitting at a real dining table instead of eating out of takeout containers in your tiny apartment. But I suppose we can't all come from families with legacy." I just smiled, took a sip of water and let it roll off my back. Little did she know my father's legacy was recorded in history books, and my single trust fund could have bought her entire neighborhood twice over. But my silence only fueled her arrogance. Eleanor saw my quiet nature as weakness, a lack of spine that made me an easy target. Behind closed doors, the pressure on Mark was relentless. Eleanor constantly whispered in his ear, warning him that I was a gold digger playing a long game to strip him of his mid-level corporate salary and his modest family inheritance. She couldn't stomach the thought of a penniless orphan entering her circle, and she began orchestrating a plan to push me out of Mark's life once and for all. A plan that was about to walk right through my front door. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Eleanor standing on the porch, wearing a floor-length trench coat and a look of cold triumph. Standing right behind her was a sharp-looking man in a tailored charcoal suit, carrying a thick leather briefcase. Mr. Vance, a high-end family lawyer known for tearing people apart in courtrooms. Without waiting for an invitation, Eleanor pushed past me into our small living room. She didn't bother taking off her wet coat, nor did she acknowledge the cup of tea I had been drinking. She simply gestured for her lawyer to step forward and sat herself down at our modest dining table like a judge opening a courtroom session. "Let's skip the pleasantries, Clara," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with condescension. She tapped her manicured nail against the polished wood of the table. "Mark is my son, And I will not allow his future to be dragged down by someone with zero assets, zero prospects, and a questionable lineage. Mr. Vance unzipped his briefcase with a sharp, metallic slide and pulled out a heavy stack of legal documents. He slid them across the table toward me alongside a sleek Montblanc pen. "This is a prenuptial and postnuptial agreement," Eleanor declared, leaning back with a smug grin. "It stipulates that in the event of a separation you walk away with absolutely nothing. No property, no alimony, no right to a single cent Mark ever earns or inherits. Sign it right now, or I will cut Mark off from the family business, pull his trust backing, and make sure he never sees a dime." Eleanor stared at me, thoroughly convinced she held every single card in her hands, completely unaware of the trap she was setting for herself. I didn't cry, scream, or throw a scene. Instead, I calmly pulled out the dining chair, sat down across from Eleanor and her high-priced lawyer, and began reading through the agreement line by line. Mr. Vance looked slightly taken aback by my composure, but Eleanor just folded her arms, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips as if watching a defeated mouse walk into a trap. As I turned the pages, one specific clause caught my eye. Eleanor's lawyer had drafted a fierce, aggressive non-disclosure and financial transparency clause. It strictly penalized any spouse who concealed assets, lied about financial status, or engaged in financial deception, forcing the guilty party to surrender all rights to contested marital property and cover all legal fees. Eleanor had put it in there specifically to trap me, thoroughly convinced I would hide some small debt or lie about my humble background. I almost smiled. She had accidentally created the exact weapon that would backfire on her. Without saying a word, I picked up the Montblanc pen, signed my name in neat, elegant cursive on every designated line, and slid the stack back across the table. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly in surprise at how easily I had yielded. She snatched up the documents, thoroughly convinced she had put the penniless orphan in her place once and for all. "Smart choice, Clara," she said, sliding into her coat with a satisfied scoff. "At least you know your place." The moment the door clicked shut behind them, I picked up my phone. I didn't call Mark and I didn't panic. I called Arthur Pendleton, my late father's senior estate attorney, a man who managed multi-billion-dollar portfolios for generals, senators, and titans of industry. "Arthur," I said quietly, staring out at the rain, "I just signed an agreement. I need your team to review it and turn every single trap inside out." Over the next 2 weeks, Eleanor's arrogance turned into outright desperation. Behind her grand posture and country club prestige lay a rotting financial foundation. She was quietly swimming in high-interest debts, bad investments, and failed real estate ventures. Sensing an easy exit, she attempted to force Mark and me into purchasing a commercial property she secretly owned, at an absurdly inflated price, to bail herself out without exposing her insolvency. She used every ounce of maternal leverage she had, guilt-tripping Mark and threatening to ruin his standing in her corporate circle if he didn't sign off on the deal. While Eleanor was busy manipulating her son, Arthur Pendleton and my father's top-tier legal team were quietly dissecting every layer of her life. What they uncovered went far beyond simple debt. Eleanor had been mismanaging the family's old trust accounts, committing blatant financial fraud, and unlawfully taking money from funds meant for Mark's future to cover her lavish lifestyle. She had even listed assets on her official declarations that she had no legal right to own. I sat Mark down one evening in our quiet kitchen. I didn't yell, nor did I attack his mother. I simply laid out the bank statements, the property deeds, and the trail of shell corporations that Arthur had untangled. I let him see the cold, hard numbers for himself. For the first time in his life, the scales fell from Mark's eyes. He saw his mother not as a protective matriarch, but as a ruthless manipulator who was using both of us as financial shields to hide her own impending ruin. "She's been using me my whole life, Clara," Mark whispered, his voice cracking as he stared at the mountain of evidence. "I know," I said gently, squeezing his hand. "And now it's time we put an end to it." The climax arrived on a tense Thursday afternoon inside a high-floor conference room in downtown Chicago. Eleanor had summoned Mark, myself, and her legal team to finalize the commercial property transfer, the deal she desperately needed to cover her massive debts. She sat at the head of the polished oak table like a queen about to claim her prize, a smug smile plastered across her face. "Let's wrap this up quickly," Eleanor said, pushing the property purchase agreement toward Mark. "Sign here, Mark. It's time you start acting like a man and taking responsibility for this family." Before Mark could pick up the pen, the heavy glass doors of the boardroom swung open. In walked Arthur Pendleton, flanked by 3 senior partners from the city's most formidable corporate law firm, each carrying thick leather binders. Eleanor's smile faltered. "What is the meaning of this? Who authorized these people to be here?" "I did," I said calmly, standing up from my seat. Arthur placed a heavy dossier directly in front of Eleanor. "Mrs. Vance, I am Arthur Pendleton, lead counsel for the General Edward Vance estate and senior trustee of the Vance Family Wealth Fund. We are here to represent Clara Vance." Eleanor let out a sharp, hysterical laugh. "Clara? Her father was a nobody. She doesn't have a dime to hire a real lawyer." "My father was a decorated 4-star general," I said, my voice cutting through the room with absolute authority. "And his estate left me $68 million in liquid assets and private equity. Which means, Eleanor, I don't need Mark's money. In fact, I could buy your entire life twice over." Arthur opened the dossier, revealing the financial audit reports alongside the prenuptial agreement Eleanor had forced me to sign 2 weeks prior. "Furthermore," Arthur continued coldly, "the strict financial disclosure clause you drafted in this prenup mandates immediate legal action against any party engaging in financial deception. We have documented your illegal diversion of trust funds, tax fraud, and attempt to unload a toxic $4 million debt onto your son. You signed this agreement, Mrs. Vance. And now, every single trap you set for Clara has legally stripped you of your corporate standing." Eleanor turned pale as chalk, her eyes darting between the documents and my composed face as the realization hit her. She had tried to ruin a woman who possessed total power over her fate. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor's carefully constructed illusion completely collapsed. Facing overwhelming evidence of financial fraud and breach of fiduciary duty, she was forced to resign from her board positions, liquidate her personal assets to pay off her debts, and quietly fade from the high society circles she had spent a lifetime obsessing over. She went from being a proud matriarch to facing total financial ruin and public embarrassment, a victim of the very legal traps she had designed to destroy me. Mark spent a long time coming to terms with the truth about his mother and the reality of my inheritance. He apologized deeply, tears in his eyes, for allowing his mother's cruelty to shadow our lives for so long. He didn't care about my $68 million. He only cared that I had been treated with respect. Together we decided to close that painful chapter of our lives. We used a portion of my father's legacy to establish a charitable foundation in his honor, supporting veterans and young archivists who needed a start in life. Looking back, I don't regret keeping my wealth a secret for as long as I did. Staying quiet allowed me to see people for who they truly were, stripping away the fake smiles and greed that money often attracts. It proved to me that Mark loved me for my heart, while Eleanor only valued what she could control. True power doesn't come from shouting your worth from the rooftops or hiding behind expensive suits. It comes from knowing who you are, standing firm in your integrity, and letting the truth speak for itself when the right moment arrives.